le voulez bien. Donc, bienvenue à tous et à toutes dans ce 7e webinaire maintenant, organisé donc par l'EPA dans le cadre du Youth Museum Forum. Le sujet d'aujourd'hui est très important à nos yeux parce que finalement, c'était un peu un des objectifs de ce projet, de définir à quoi devrait ressembler le nouveau musée africain. Et c'est justement le thème de ce mois-ci qui a été discuté donc, dans le forum de discussion, le nouveau musée africain. Donc, j'ai le plaisir d'accueillir Zuhura, qui sera la modératrice aujourd'hui, et nos deux panélistes qui ont accepté d'être présents parmi nous aujourd'hui, donc Madame Betty Karanja et le professeur Ibio Nzeza. Donc, je vais déjà présenter la parole à Zuhura. Zuhura, please, you have the floor. You can start with the moderation. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Alisa, for the brief introduction. My name is Zuhura from the University of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and today I will be taking you through about a brief introduction on what we have been discussed for the month of April concerning the topic of a new African museum model. So starting with an introduction, as we know that there are this ongoing discussion regarding the museum, particularly African museum. So today we have seen that in African museum, most professionals and audience, they have still question about the African museum model and what often come to our mind or what perspective we have regarding these museums in the end comes to rely in the so-called decolonizations. So decolonizing our museums on one way or another will help to restructure again our museums and make them to be innovative and inclusive. So the future of the museums will therefore be decolonize the museums. It will be connected with the local community through participatory and collaborative projects. But again, it will place the consultations, cooperations, and innovative interaction with all majority and minorities, with all majorities and minorities together. But again, museums are now expected to take on and expand and involve different roles regarding communities hub and facilitating rejuvenators as the transition toward becoming a museums of the future. But again, the futures of African museums also use new technologies, and the good thing is previously we used to discuss about how we are going to digitize these African museums so that they can become a place where they can become we can create a welcoming environment for the entire community's audience, particularly youth, who can interact and engage in various exhibitions that are found in our museums. So museums should leverage technology and create immense experiences and increase access by bringing their collections and program beyond the museum's wall. But lastly, the future of African museum will be a key actor in the public policies, as well as strive to foster transparency, reconciliation, and trust among the local and international community. So not only that, the future of African museum that we expect is that it will bring some sort of an inclusion whereby the community who feel that they were neglected, they are not part of it, they could get a chance of being engaged, listen to their views and perspective, so that we can create or we can build the African museum we want. So in the end of this discussion to the forums, we pose some questions which state that what does the museums of the future, what does the museum of the future for Africa look like? So when someone speak about African museum, what comes to our mind? What image comes to our mind regarding the African museum? So today we are going to discuss about this topic, and we have panelists. We have two panelists who are going to take us through the discussions. We will be in a position of sharing their insight regarding the topic. The first panelist we have here is Dr. Zenza. Dr. Zenza hold a PhD in social communication from the Catholic University of Congo. But again, he also hold a master in cultural industrial management from Senegal and a certificate in business. He also went to London School of Economic and Political Science, but again, his research and teaching focused on a cultural and creative industry, multimedia, and popular culture in its relation to the economic impact of COVID-19 on the African cultural and creative industry sector at a cited industrial sectors. But again, he was cited in two UNESCO reports, Cultural Crisis 2020 and Cultural in Times of COVID. So Professor Nzinze, he's at a Catholic University of Congo and the University of Kinshasa. He has been a director in the Department of Culture of Senegal at the University of Alexandria, Egypt since October 2021, but again, a direct operator of the Francophone. So we also have a second panelist who is known as Miss Betty Karanja. Betty Karanja, she's the senior curator with the National Museum of Kenya, heading the Nairobi Gallery Museum and the National Monument. This position he had for the last 1 year, but again, having worked in the museum for the past 17 years, she has served at the various other capacities like exhibition curator at the Nairobi Museum, curator of Nyeri Museums, but again, she served as an education officer. So with this intensive experience in the museum field, she's highly skilled curatorial practice, exhibition development, collection management, and building relationship with artists, collectors, donors, and other stakeholders. So Miss Betty, again, she's particularly interested in promoting cultural heritage and preservation of cultural and natural heritage sites and collection. She is committed to using her skills and expertise to promote peace and support sustainable development through cultural understanding. But again, she has also been involved in various projects geared toward realizing and decentralization as well as decolonization of the museum. So without wasting time, let me welcome Dr. Nzenza so that...
Excuse me. First, before giving the floor to the panelists, I would like to first make a summary of the discussions. Okay. Then you can give the floor to the panelists. But thank you very, very much for introducing the subject as well as the panelists. Thank you. Alors, donc, je vais d'abord, donc, avant de donner la parole à nos invités, faire un bref résumé des discussions qui ont eu lieu donc, sur le forum en ligne. Et donc, en fait, les deux questions, la question qui a été posée donc, ce mois-ci était donc d'inviter les participants à définir ce à quoi ressemble le musée du futur pour l'Afrique, selon eux, et également de partager des projets et des expériences qui puissent montrer le bon exemple. Alors, voici donc quelques réponses des participants. Pour commencer, donc, pour ce qui est de la définition du musée africain du futur selon les participants, voici quelques exemples ici. Donc, par exemple, Carly explique que pour lui, le nouveau musée conservera ses vestiges et fera savoir notre histoire aux générations futures. Tafa explique que le musée du futur doit être un espace symbolique et dynamique qui préserve et transmet le patrimoine culturel tangible et intangible d'une communauté. Laurine explique que selon sa conception, ma conception du musée africain du futur est un espace vivant, un espace de transmission et de retransmission culturelle, un milieu qui est allié à la fois la tradition et la modernité. On a encore une fois Laurine qui explique que pour elle, le futur musée africain devrait être un cadre de développement socio-culturel et économique. Carly explique que le musée du futur est un musée en réseau où chaque bien de chaque pays devient un bien mobilier du patrimoine culturel africain que nous devons tous protéger. Et enfin, Unigwe explique que le futur musée africain doit être vivant pour booster un développement endogène et soutenir les initiatives de réalisation collective tout en intégrant les nouvelles technologies. Donc, voici donc quelques extraits. Notamment ici Franck et Mayou et Laurine, qui expliquent donc leur conception du futur musée africain. Et donc, pour ce qui est ce que devraient être, en tout cas, les objectifs du nouveau musée africain, voici ici quelques exemples. Donc, pour l'ensemble des participants, un des objectifs doit être de se reconnecter et de se réapproprier son histoire, de la transmettre et de la vulgariser, de rendre visibles les riches diversités de l'Afrique, de décoloniser les musées, favoriser la restitution des biens culturels, rendre les musées africains accessibles à tous, utiliser les nouvelles technologies, valoriser la créativité artistique contemporaine, favoriser un développement local inclusif et équilibré, célébrer et partager des savoirs traditionnels des communautés locales, sortir les œuvres de la prison des vitrines et communiquer avec et autour de ces œuvres, donner le véritable sens des objets tout en préservant leur bonne conservation, questionner et inviter les différents acteurs à se questionner sur les œuvres et sécuriser les collections. Donc, voici quelques illustrations tirées du forum. Il a également été mentionné le fait de faire attention à ne pas s'enfermer dans le passé au détriment des problématiques d'actualité, des nouveaux types de patrimoine et de modes de valorisation. Également, on a évoqué donc l'intégration des objectifs de développement durable et la création de conditions adéquates de conservation et de valorisation avant d'envisager le retour des œuvres quand on parle de restitution des biens. Donc, voici ici un extrait. Et par rapport aux exemples qui ont été partagés, il y a donc les programmes d'études auxquels un des participants a eu la chance de participer, donc le Museum for Future Africa et un autre programme qui s'appelait Talking Objects. Ce même participant a également partagé donc, son projet de création d'un musée mémorial du Wallo. Une des participantes a également évoqué le festival patrimonial de danse et musique patrimoniale organisé par le ministère de la Culture du Cameroun en 2020. Un autre participant a partagé l'expérience des missionnaires SMA de Lyon et notamment donc, du musée Carrefour des cultures africaines et a fait un parallèle avec la cellule diocésaine du patrimoine religieux à Porto Novo qui s'inspire beaucoup de cette expérience. Et enfin, l'exemple de la restitution des 26 œuvres au Bénin a également été évoqué comme un beau cas d'exemple. Donc, voici par exemple le projet que je mentionnais tout à l'heure, qui est donc le projet d'un des participants sur un musée mémorial au Wallo. Et ici, une photo d'un des participants qui a eu la chance de participer au projet de restitution des 26 œuvres et plus particulièrement à la clôture de l'exposition et à la conservation des œuvres par la suite. Voilà pour ce qui est du résumé. So now, Zuhura, I will give you back the floor to continue with the moderation and the invitation of panelists. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Alisa, for the brief introduction on what's going on to the forum. So now let me welcome Dr. Ribio so that he can provide his insight regarding the discussing topic. You are warmly welcome, Doctor.
Bonjour, welcome to all. Je vais m'exprimer en français et les services de traduction, d'interprétation pourront faire le reste. Bonjour, je m'appelle Ribionze Zabounketi-Boussé. Je suis actuellement directeur du département culture à l'université Senghor à Alexandrie, en Égypte. Je vais essayer de partager avec vous ma réflexion au sujet du nouveau musée africain. Donc, je vais commencer par, je pense, partager mon écran pour la présentation. Ma réflexion, c'est autour du thème le nouveau musée africain, le thème qui nous est soumis aujourd'hui. À le lire, peut-être on peut penser à un nouveau bâtiment, le nouveau musée africain, un bâtiment qui sera érigé, un bâtiment qui sera construit, ou peut-être quel sera le contenu du musée africain du futur. Et selon ma compréhension, je pense beaucoup plus à une nouvelle façon de faire, une nouvelle façon de gérer un musée, une nouvelle façon qu'un musée en Afrique est en mesure d'offrir des services au public. Donc, le musée reste un musée, donc il y a des critères, il y a des obligations auxquelles une institution muséale doit répondre. Cela est universel. Donc, les musées africains où les Africains font partie de l'ICOM, donc il y a des principes généraux qui sont fixés au niveau international que toutes les parties sont censées appliquer. Mais maintenant, dans le concret, dans la vie de tous les jours, comment est-ce qu'un musée en Afrique, un musée qui se dit africain, doit-il servir les publics, doit-il faire sa programmation? Donc, c'est cela un peu ma conception du sujet. Et la problématique a été bien soulevée à l'introduction. Donc, il y a deux questions auxquelles répondre. La première, à quoi ressemblerait le musée du futur pour l'Afrique? Et j'ai essayé de dire que ce n'est pas un nouveau bâtiment, mais c'est dans la façon de gérer ce musée, dans la façon dont ce musée va rendre des services au public. On pourrait reconnaître les particularités d'un musée africain. Et en seconde position, présenter quelques idées, quelques initiatives, quelques projets actuels sur le terrain qui pourraient répondre quelque part à cette nouvelle façon de faire d'un musée qui se dit africain. Donc, je vais commencer ma réflexion en prenant pour point de départ la rencontre de l'ICOM qui a eu lieu en 1991 au Ghana, au Bénin, au Togo, qui avait pour thème « Quel musée pour l'Afrique ? Patrimoine en devenir ». Et au cours de cette rencontre, il y a une personnalité importante, l'ancien président du Mali, qui était à l'époque président de l'ICOM international, Alpha Omar Konaré, qui avait fait une déclaration qui est restée plus ou moins célèbre, je le cite, « Tuer le modèle occidental de musée en Afrique pour que s'épanouissent de nouveaux modes de conservation et de promotion du patrimoine ». On parle beaucoup de décolonisation de musées. Voilà, c'est évoqué déjà à cette époque-là. Je ne vais pas m'y attarder, mais je vais beaucoup plus considérer la dernière partie de sa citation, la dernière partie de sa déclaration. Ce sont les nouveaux modes de conservation, de promotion du patrimoine. Je pense que c'est à ce niveau-là que les musées en Afrique pourront marquer leur particularité par rapport à d'autres musées sous d'autres cieux. Et comment est-ce que je vais y parvenir? Dans ma méthodologie, je partirai de la nouvelle conception du musée aujourd'hui et à partir de là, je vais tirer un peu les points sur lesquels les musées africains pourraient beaucoup plus s'investir dans le sens de pouvoir refléter une nouvelle façon de faire, de nouveaux modes de conservation et de promotion du patrimoine. Et comme nous le savons bien, le 24 août 2022, le Conseil international des musées a adopté une nouvelle définition des musées. Et cette définition, page suivante, diapositive suivante. Oui, voilà. Et cette définition, elle est longue, hein, donc c'est un musée, c'est une institution permanente à but non lucratif et au service de la société qui se consacre à la recherche, la collecte, la conservation, l'interprétation et l'exposition du patrimoine matériel et immatériel. Il est ouvert au public, accessible et inclusif. Il encourage la diversité et la durabilité. Les musées opèrent et communiquent de manière éthique et professionnelle avec la participation des diverses communautés. Ils offrent à leur public des expériences variées d'éducation, de divertissement, de réflexion et de partage de connaissances. Et j'ai mis en gras les points essentiels qui, à mon avis, pourraient attirer l'attention des musées africains. Donc, les musées africains doivent être vraiment au service de la société. Ils doivent davantage accorder de l'importance au patrimoine culturel immatériel et pas que. En troisième position, vraiment impliquer les communautés, ce qui n'est pas suffisamment fait à l'heure actuelle. Et en dernière position, offrir des expériences d'éducation et aussi de divertissement, parce qu'on peut apprendre, on peut transmettre le patrimoine à travers des expériences de divertissement. À la diapositive suivante, là, nous allons voir déjà deux points qui sont pour moi des nouvelles voies exploitées par des musées africains selon une nouvelle dynamique. On pourrait dire des musées africains, mais dans la nouvelle dynamique. C'est aussi une autre façon de comprendre les nouveaux musées africains. Donc, les nouvelles voies, ça serait être au service de la société et faire participer diverses communautés. Et je réponds déjà à la question, à la deuxième question posée, celle concernant des projets ou des initiatives qui entrent dans ce schéma-là, de nouvelles façons de conserver et de promouvoir le patrimoine culturel africain. Pour moi, il s'agit de démocratiser la notion de musée. En général, les musées appartiennent à l'État, donc ce sont des services publics, mais il faudrait davantage encourager la création des musées communautaires, qu'on appellerait communautaires, qui appartiennent à des groupes, à des communautés. C'est de la même façon qu'on a, par exemple, des radios qui sont des radios de services publics qui appartiennent à l'État, en même temps qu'on a des radios communautaires qui appartiennent à des associations qui appartiennent à des communautés. Ça serait une façon de démocratiser quelque part la notion de musée, mais évidemment, comme les musées qui appartiennent à l'État sont des services publics et ont les ressources humaines, matérielles suffisantes, ces musées-là pourront superviser, pourront accompagner les musées communautaires. Et à cette occasion, ça sera à cette occasion, ça sera possible de pouvoir impliquer davantage des leaders communautaires. Et l'exemple que j'ai pris est celui de la case patrimoniale de Batoufam. Évidemment, il y a plusieurs cases patrimoniales. Et là, c'est un projet que mène la route de chefferie au Cameroun. Dans la diapositive suivante, je vais entrevoir une nouvelle voie. Sur la diapositive suivante, parmi toujours les nouvelles voies des exemples, il y a le projet du Grand Musée de l'Afrique qui fait partie des initiatives phares de l'agenda 2063 de l'Union africaine. Il y a 14 projets phares, c'est parmi l'un des deux projets. Et ce qui est intéressant là-bas, et comme nouvelle voie, c'est la promotion du patrimoine matériel et immatériel et aussi du patrimoine naturel. Parce que dans le projet de ce grand musée de l'Afrique, il y a un département qui est prévu, c'est celui de la conservation de la nature. Donc, il sera question de pouvoir exposer aussi des échantillons de la faune et de la flore de l'Afrique. Et ce qui est intéressant, c'est que ça permet le dialogue entre le patrimoine culturel et le patrimoine naturel. En tout cas, généralement, dans nos musées, c'est uniquement le patrimoine culturel qui est mis en avant, mais faire cette ouverture vers le patrimoine naturel est intéressant dans la mesure où on encouragerait le dialogue entre la diversité culturelle et la biodiversité, et tout simplement la diversité dans l'ordre du naturel et dans l'ordre du biologique. Et aussi aujourd'hui, avec les questions climatiques, on évoque davantage la contribution de la culture à la préservation du climat, à la préservation de la nature et inversement aussi. Donc, c'est intéressant de montrer dans les musées comment est-ce que la culture permet de pouvoir conserver la nature, de pouvoir la maintenir, mais en même temps aussi comment est-ce que la nature favorise aussi certaines pratiques culturelles. Et là, il y a un concept intéressant que l'UNESCO utilise, que certains peut-être remettent en question, disons, hésite un peu à promouvoir avec le terme indigène, mais c'est un Local Indigenous Knowledge System, donc les systèmes de connaissances que les populations, que les communautés qu'on peut appeler entre guillemets indigènes avaient l'habitude ou que ces communautés possèdent et qui peuvent être mises à contribution dans, par exemple, les efforts de lutte contre les changements climatiques. Et il y a une initiative intéressante, Climate Heritage Network, qui essaie de mettre vraiment ce lien entre le climat et la culture et de manière plus générale entre la nature et la culture qu'on ne devrait pas toujours séparer. Et dans la prochaine diapositive, nous voyons aussi l'emphase sur les expériences variées d'éducation et surtout des divertissements. Et là, ça serait vraiment un lien entre les musées et les industries de contenu, les industries culturelles et créatives. Et là, on voit par exemple un jeune créateur de contenu, de cinéma, d'animation. Ça serait l'occasion aussi que le musée qui promeut, qui transmet le patrimoine culturel immatériel, les contes, les façons de faire, les pratiques, les rituels, que cela puisse être capté et transformé en contenu de divertissement qui pourrait être exposé dans les musées ou que le musée pourrait permettre à ce que ça soit diffusé dans des lieux, dans des espaces extérieurs au musée, mais qui entrent dans le cadre de la politique, une nouvelle politique des publics des musées. Et cette option aurait comme avantage à la fois de contribuer à la valorisation et à la promotion du patrimoine culturel immatériel, mais en même temps d'être un potentiel de création d'emplois ou de promotion de l'entrepreneuriat auprès des jeunes, ces jeunes qui sont axés sur les technologies, qui produisent du contenu, qui pourraient trouver un marché intéressant. Et je continue sur cette lancée dans la diapositive suivante, où, par exemple, grâce aux nouvelles technologies, on peut réaliser, je pense que cela a été peut-être souligné bien avant, des expositions virtuelles. Là, j'ai pris l'exemple de l'exposition des costumes traditionnels du Cameroun réalisée par l'association Patrimondus qui pourrait, dans les cas de la collaboration, il y a une collaboration avec le Musée national du Cameroun et ça pourrait être un exemple que pas mal d'autres musées sur le continent pourraient mettre en œuvre. Et sur la diapositive suivante, toujours avec l'emploi ou le recours aux technologies nouvelles, ici, c'est une expérience menée par une association au Togo, ACD, Action Culture et Développement du Sud au Togo, c'est grâce aux technologies immersives, permet de pouvoir visiter le riche patrimoine culturel matériel du Togo. Donc, grâce aux technologies immersives, c'est une voie pour pouvoir créer de l'emploi parce que dans le cadre de ce projet, c'est une association qui a du personnel, qui utilise les technologies et qui met cela au service de la promotion du patrimoine. Et ça serait plus intéressant que les musées s'inscrivent dans des collaborations qui promeuvent ces genres d'activités. Et dans la diapositive suivante, on voit comment est-ce que cela permet vraiment de servir les communautés. Là, on a une maman qui vend, mais qui, grâce à une technologie immersive, est en mesure de pouvoir visiter quelques points du patrimoine culturel togolais. Et sur la photo d'en bas, là, on voit comment est-ce des activités de ces expériences peuvent être mises au service des élèves dans une école dans cette perspective de promotion du patrimoine. Mais si c'est dans le cadre d'une coopération avec un musée, ça serait une nouvelle façon de faire de nouveaux modes opératoires pour des musées qui se disent africains, qui répondent vraiment aux besoins des populations et qui vont à l'encontre des détenteurs des savoirs pour continuer à récolter les informations et les données. Et sur la diapositive suivante, je voudrais conclure au fait pour dire que les musées africains ne seront pas vraiment des nouveaux musées en termes de bâtiments, parce qu'on a besoin peut-être de bâtiments qui répondent aux normes, comme je l'ai dit, mais ils gagneraient à vraiment s'inscrire dans l'esprit du temps. Là, j'emprunte à Edgar Morin, le sociologue, philosophe centenaire français. Dans l'esprit du temps, c'est quoi l'esprit du temps? C'est qui marche aujourd'hui et qui pourrait attirer du public qui pourra être pertinent. Et c'est quoi? C'est tout simplement raconter et transmettre le patrimoine culturel puisé à la source, c'est-à-dire patrimoine culturel auprès des détenteurs des savoirs et qui permet aux jeunes, qui permet aux personnes à qui ces informations seront portées de pouvoir replonger dans les sources de leur histoire et se situer en tant que citoyen, en tant qu'Africain. Et ce fait de raconter, de transmettre du patrimoine culturel puisé à la source devrait recourir aux technologies actuelles parce que c'est l'esprit du temps et qu'on ne devrait pas s'en passer, tout en créant des opportunités qui favorisent l'entrepreneuriat, qu'il y ait des possibilités pour des jeunes de pouvoir créer du contenu qui seront au service des musées et qui serviront les diverses populations. Voilà en gros ma réflexion sur la question et je suis disponible pour répondre aux questions et peut-être creuser d'autres points qui n'auraient pas été suffisamment mis en avant dans ma présentation. Merci.
Well, thank you so much, Doctor. And thank you so much for such a wonderful insights regarding the topic. So now it's time for questions, some clarifications. You're all welcome. Hi, Halisa, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Merci beaucoup, professeur, pour cette présentation. Moi, je me posais la question donc, par rapport à votre background et votre travail au sein de l'université Senghor. Je me demandais comment étaient enseignées toutes ces questions autour du musée donc, au sein de l'université Senghor et je ne sais pas, dans d'autres universités ou d'autres écoles dans lesquelles vous avez l'occasion d'enseigner. Est-ce que ces questions sont évoquées en fait auprès des étudiants aujourd'hui? Merci beaucoup.
OK, je réponds directement ou bien on fait une série?
Maybe I will let you answer. Do you think we should give the floor to many other questions or what do you suggest? Bon, professeur, je pense que vous pouvez répondre directement.
Merci. Par rapport à l'expérience de l'université Senghor, nous avons effectivement des cours qui accordent l'attention à ces préoccupations importantes. Bon, nous avons par exemple des cours classiques sur l'inventaire, la conservation, la restauration de biens culturels, des cours sur la préparation de dossiers pour inscrire un bien sur la liste du patrimoine mondial. Nous avons un cours sur la restitution, sur le marché de l'art, sur la restitution des biens culturels. Donc, il y a à la fois des aspects techniques sur le fonctionnement d'un musée, sur le fonctionnement d'un équipement patrimonial, mais aussi des problématiques qui sont un peu liées aux réalités africaines, notamment celle de la restitution, même si ça concerne aussi d'autres espaces à travers le monde, mais c'est une question qui se pose avec prégnance actuellement. Et en même temps aussi, même dans les aspects techniques, nous avons des enseignants qui connaissent bien le terrain africain, qui essayent de montrer dans quelle mesure on peut tenir compte à la fois des standards internationaux en la matière et essayer de travailler en fonction des réalités et des situations locales, des situations sur le terrain. On peut avoir peut-être en matière de conservation, peut-être d'autres types de matériaux qu'on ne pourrait pas peut-être acheter avec suffisamment de moyens, mais dont on pourrait trouver des succédanés ou des produits de substitution. Donc, pour répondre à votre question, il y a des notions de base ou des notions techniques sur la gestion d'un musée, mais en tenant compte aussi des réalités du continent et aussi des questions transversales comme celle de la restitution, qui permettent aux étudiants de manière technique pour savoir comment est-ce qu'on mène une démarche en matière de restitution sur le plan juridique, sur le plan diplomatique, sur le plan opérationnel, et en même temps aussi comment avoir des orientations claires en la matière. Je ne sais pas si j'ai répondu à votre question.
Oui, merci beaucoup, professeur. Merci.
Thank you very much. Anyone who has a question? Anyone who has a question? So let me ask these questions. Dr. Zinze, you talk about the issues of new way of doing things in our museums, like approaches and methodologies. But again, you talk about African museum should serve its society. So in African museum, we all know that we have these government museums, but again, we also have these community museums. So the mode of operation of these two museums are quite different. And here we are discussing about how we are going to build a new model of African museum. So my question is based on the community museum. Do you think they have already met these criteria of having a new model of African museum, or do you think they were operated in African ways compared to this government museum? Thank you. Hi.
Professeur, votre micro est fermé.
Okay, sorry, I was saying that I'm going to reply in French. I'm sorry for the mic. Bon, les musées communautaires, je pense que ont peut-être un peu moins d'expérience que les musées publics depuis leur existence, mais je pense qu'il y a dans cette collaboration-là, moi, je vois beaucoup plus une collaboration entre les musées étatiques et les musées communautaires qui appartiennent à des associations de communautés pour permettre que ces musées répondent quand même aux standards en la matière, parce que les musées publics ont beaucoup plus d'expérience, ont peut-être beaucoup plus de moyens et des ressources humaines qualifiées pour aider et accompagner les musées communautaires. Mais les musées communautaires ont leur importance dans la mesure où ces musées sont vraiment au cœur des sociétés, au cœur de communautés et sont en dialogue direct avec, beaucoup plus direct avec les détenteurs de savoir. Moi, je pense qu'ils sont déjà dans cette orientation des nouveaux musées africains qui servent vraiment les communautés, parce que ces musées-là appartiennent déjà aux communautés, alors que quand on a un musée public, c'est vraiment c'est une institution qui appartient à l'État et qui travaille dans un cadre bien déterminé, qui doit faire l'effort d'aller faire le communauté, alors que les musées communautaires sont déjà au sein de ces communautés-là, au sein de ces sociétés. Donc, l'effort serait beaucoup plus une collaboration entre les publics et les musées communautaires. Et ces musées communautaires, du fait qu'ils soient déjà au sein de communautés, ont cette dynamique dans ce que moi je considère comme de nouveaux musées africains, quitte à recevoir un peu plus d'orientation et d'encadrement scientifique et technique auprès des musées les plus avancés, tels que les musées publics. Mais je pense que les musées communautaires ont déjà beaucoup d'atouts pour s'inscrire dans la logique des nouveaux musées africains tels que nous le souhaitons.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your response. So if anyone has a question, or we should move forward to another panelist, Miss Betty Karanja, who is a senior curator from the National Museum of Kenya. You are warmly welcome to provide your insights regarding this topic. Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Betty, we can hear you.
Now you can hear me. Thank God.
Yes.
Okay.
Kindly just log off the audio on the other one because there's an echo.
Is it still there now? Because I've tried to.
Okay, thank you. We can hear it. Please go ahead.
Fantastic. I'm so sorry about this. I don't know what happened today. Just when I needed to have everything working is when, this technology that we are talking about comes to work against us. My name is Betty, like I was aptly introduced earlier. I am a senior curator with the National Museums of Kenya. I work currently working at the Nairobi Gallery, which is the home of what we call the point zero in my country, which is a space from which distances were measured from. And we also host the collections of the second Vice President of the Republic of Kenya. So you are all welcome to come visit us when you are in Nairobi. Let me share my screen and start off my presentation. And just to say that I'm really honored that you invited me today to share with you insights that I've picked along the way of what I think and probably where I feel the museums should be going and maybe could be going. Of course, we know some of our institutions are already moving in that direction. So I've named my my presentation Museums 2.0 because I assume that we are already in Museums 1.0. So we are moving on to the next. So, we want to take a peek into the future. And when I was thinking about this topic, I thought there is no better way of thinking about the future than first, thinking about where we are coming from. And this is illustrated very well with an analogy of the Sankofa bird. Sankofa means to retrieve in the Twi language of Ghana. And as you can see in this image here, the bird is illustrated with its head turned backwards, while its feet face forward, and it carries a precious egg in its mouth. This symbolizes the ability to pick the best practices and carry those with you as you move forward, because then we do not want to, just move, into the future. There's no way we can move into the future without picking bits and pieces here and there of where we've been, what we've been doing, what we ascribe to as museums. So Dr. Nzaza has talked very well about what a museum is. So I'll just touch on that a bit and, ask ourselves, what is a museum anyway? To muse is to contemplate. So in itself, this definition then created spaces or helped to create spaces which are thought to be more of a scholarly nature and hence elitist. That means if you're not among the caliber of people who are expected to be in those spaces, a lot of people could not be in those spaces. Some places, the word museum, so the word museum itself has a classical origin. So it's either Greek, which means museon, from which then the seats of muses is derived, which then becomes a designated place or a philosophical institution or a place of contemplation. While in Latin, it's just, places it as a place of philosophical discussion. So in itself, this definition or this outlook of museums started to put off people. A lot of people were not able to access museums. A lot of people could not go into these spaces because then they were not thought to be of that caliber of people who could, access or go to or visit the spaces. Now, in Africa, when these colonial administrators came to Africa, they collected a lot of objects from our communities. And these things were thought to be objects of curiosities. And these are objects which they had never encountered before. And so in the end, then, the objects of curiosities from these collectors is what ended up in our museums. As you can see on my far left, we have what we call a cabinet of curiosity with a lot of animal heads at the top here, and a lot of cabinets and drawers with probably, you know, insects pinned in there. Probably there are jars with formaldehyde holding a lot of other you know, insects or creatures that these administrators had never seen before. So to them, these were objects of curiosities. But, you know, it should be noted that these were items, or these so-called objects of curiosities were, to those who made them, utilitarian. You know, these were our clothes, they were our utensils, our implements, our totems, and so on. You can see on the right the objects that I've tried to place here. This is a headrest from the Turkana people. It's a very small stool that they carry around with them when, you know, because they're pastoral, so they move around a lot. So they usually do not have very bulky, you know, home appliances or home apparatus. So it's a stool that they either use to sit on, or when they're resting, they actually use it as a pillow and lie on. These two are fertility dolls, again, from the north part of Kenya. We have what we call here a kigango, which is really a grave post from the coastal communities in Kenya, used to demarcate as places where, when people have passed on, the places where they are buried. So I will probably equate it to, say, a cross in the current setting. And down here we have a mask by the Tiriki people. It's a circumcision mask. So I can just imagine when these colonial administrators came and, you know, they came across such objects, how to them these objects were really, you know, curious and odd looking. Yet to us, there were things that, you know, we're using in our everyday today life. So you know, museums were also thought to be very grand places. You know, the buildings were grand buildings with grand hallways and archways. Like you can see here, just took a very old photo of the National Museums of Kenya in the, I think, before 2000, before the year 2000. And this is the current outlook of the same space. It was redone in the year 2005, between 2005 to 2007. So, I mean, you can just imagine how, you can just see the scale of it, and the grand hallways in the old museum and the same in the new museum. And this cuts across the whole of Africa. We had very big flamboyant spaces, like the National Museum of Cameroon. You can see just how big and flamboyant it is. The Iziko Museum in South Africa, the National Museum of Ethiopia. So, you know, these buildings were so big and so grand that, you know, our people found it very hard to go into them, because then at that point in time, most of the government institutions were very prohibitive. You know, going into an office, either you're going because you need to go pay a fine, or you're going, you know, for some reason which is not necessarily a very pleasant reason to make you want to go back there. So most of these then museums, because of this grandiosity and being compared to with government institutions, most of the local people, you know, opted to shun off of them. And, you know, so you found a space where our local, the uptake of museums was not so much by local people, but maybe by tourists or, you know, people coming from outside the country. So that is where we are coming from. So, where does this then leave us now? I'd want to approach this in two ways, three ways actually. First, I want to look at the physical changes then that will happen or can happen or should happen to ensure that we are moving in the correct direction as we're moving into the future. So I'll look at the physical changes, the financial changes that may occur or that we may see as we continue moving on into the future, and the ideological changes that may happen. So the first thing that I feel like, and I know Professor Dr. Nzeza talked about moving from buildings to approaches, and I totally agree with that. But this is something that we are apt to see in the near future. Changes from this kind of grandiose, very Western Victorian architecture to a more subtle African feel museums. So what you're seeing here is what we call the African Heritage House. It was done by one Alan Donovan and hosts a very good collection from both East Africa and West Africa mostly. And it was, he got inspiration for this space from the museum in Mali. I think this is the museum, the mosque actually is a mosque in Mali. I'm forgetting what they called it now. Then the Maropeng Museum, for example, in South Africa, where now we're seeing the space looking like a burial mound to begin with. So this is the entrance to the museum, and it is a burial mound. Because then the museum itself really talks about a paleontological exhibit. So then, because these are exhibits that were, carved out from the ground, and archaeologists did go out and exhumed them, then that's the outlook of the museum. So it's not really the Western kind of archaeology that we are used to seeing. But then as you go on into the museum and then out on the other side, you find this very interesting, very futuristic looking facade of the museum. Meaning that then, we are coming from this space where, this is our place, this is our space, this is where we are, but we have aspirations to go into the future, to go into spaces of, say, in parentheses, modernity, right? Here is the Uhuru Garden Museum and National Monument here in Kenya. It is yet to be opened to the public, but the outlook again is the same. We are really looking inward to get this architecture as opposed to looking outward, as opposed to aping the West and the kind of Western architecture that has been done there. So the inspiration in this particular space was the shield and spears, which is found in our flag and our emblems, whereby then we are picking things that people from within, our local people then are able to identify with. So I would imagine someone then seeing such a structure would probably feel, find it easier to come into this space, because then this is something that they are used to. They are, they live here. I'm sure there are many more museums out there, probably some with very with round conical structures portraying the traditional houses that we have. So that's the direction that I feel like we're going, especially when it comes to the physical infrastructure. Now, the other thing is, of course, then when we're talking about physical infrastructure, is that we're going to see spaces that then are going to be more accommodating, especially to maybe even people with disability. They're going to be able to come into our spaces more easily, because then, of course, when we talk about spaces not being able to accommodate everybody, some of the people who then are not accommodated very well include people who live with disabilities. So then we're going to see spaces which are maybe have more tactile exhibits, braille text, and even probably recordings to allow then everybody to be fully immersed in these spaces. And now when we're talking about museums being places where we can muse and sit and contemplate, that's the traditional outlook of the museums. But then does it mean that that is going to totally end and then we get very vibrant places or spaces where, we have a lot of young people coming in and enjoying themselves? I highly doubt that. I feel like we will probably have a hybrid of the same, whereby some of the spaces will be able to chill out, to muse very well and contemplate on the exhibits that we find there, while in another corner of the same museum, we accommodate then the young and vibrant visitors to the museum, where then they are able to express themselves in whichever ways they want to express themselves. So then the museum will have to adapt itself very well into hybrid places. The other thing physically that we are going to see is museums moving from just national museums into community museums, which means then that we have to have a lot of stakeholder engagement, talk to people, bring out most of what we have in our museums into those community museums, so that then people in those spaces are engaged and they're able to see at a very close, from a very close perspective, the cultural heritage of the spaces. And I must say that at least in the Constitution 2010 in Kenya, in the new dispensation of the Constitution in Kenya, we have devolution of museums, which should go on, which means then that at least every county in the country has to have a museum, which means then most of the collections that we have in the National Museum will be cascaded downwards to those museums, which to make the spaces very relevant and make sense. And so we are going to see a proliferation of these community museums, and this also comes in and goes very well hand in hand with stakeholder engagement. A lot of stakeholder engagement has to be hard. We have to talk to all those people who are around us in terms of space, who live near museums or who patronize museums, so that then we get their perspectives, because now museums are moving from a space where the curator is a person who knows it all to a space where we are bringing in dialogue. We are asking these people, what do you want to see out there? What do you want your museum to talk to you about? And that's why such forums are very important, because then we are able to garner all this information and move forward as we try to model ourselves into the best fit for our people. Of course, the digital footprints will be felt very much in the future. It has started already being felt. In Kenya, we've done this, what we call the Google Arts and Culture, where we've placed a lot of objects from our stores into that digital space, where then anyone from the comfort of their home, from abroad, from wherever they are, they could just go onto that space and be able to see the collections that the National Museums of Kenya has. So we are going to see a lot of audio, augmented reality, virtual reality, use of QR coding, which then enlivens the exhibitions, and also makes it interesting and captures the imagination of the youth, who are part of the audience that really museums are struggling to capture. So this is part of some of the ways that capturing that particular audience is going to happen. Probably also simulations of the exhibits and the exhibitions that we have, just so we have a very interactive space and not a static space, so that then the audiences that come can feel a change in the space or a liveliness in the space, as opposed to that old drab feeling of, we are going to this space where you almost are not supposed to talk, where you almost cannot, you cannot find children running around. So we are moving from that to this space where you can have a lot of discourse, you can have, a lot of interactivity, which then is going to bring on a lot of, our patrons and new audiences into these spaces. We are also seeing a change in terms of use of space, where traditionally museum spaces were only for display of exhibits. And like I said earlier, very quiet spaces where you go to muse and contemplate, but now we are finding a lot of shows going on in the museum grounds. We're finding, people doing book launches inside museums. We are seeing a lot of weddings and concerts and film shows, going on in these spaces. So a lot of change is going to be seen in this area where the use of space then becomes a bit more fluid and not as static as it was before, as we experienced before. The second thing is financially, what I feel like these future models will change. Of course, a lot of more people are getting to understand more about museums. They are starting to, we are finding we are getting a lot of people who are getting collectors, are becoming collectors, and getting used to museums and wanting to be part of museums. So I feel like in the future, especially in our setup, we might stop having to charge. Most museums have a cost where, when you go in there, you have to pay. Whereas when you look at museums in the West, most of them are actually free, but you find a long queue of people, wanting to go in there. So so I feel like probably we will stop charging, but then as we stop charging, because then we are getting a lot of collectors and other people like that, we might get more, philanthropists who will give them to these museums, so that, because of course people, the museums will, as institutions, will need to continue running. So, we get philanthropists to chip in and fund museums, whereas to the public, then they are able to access these spaces for free. So in that way, and in that sense, then more people would be able to access these spaces, because as it is right now, maybe even the little gate conservation fees that we charge will be prohibitive to some people. And in that sense, then it means that we are still cutting off a lot of people from coming into these spaces, right? So it means then that, of course, then there's going to be a lot of appreciation of art and culture by more people then, who are then going to be the philanthropists giving back to these institutions. I also feel like ideologically, museums are going to change. Like I mentioned earlier, stakeholder engagement definitely has to increase. And of course, we are seeing a lot of this now. We are seeing a lot of teacher workshops going on in museums, so that then we see from that angle or from that perspective of the teacher, what resource or how can they use the museum as a resource to help them in their curriculum or in teaching. So this kind of stakeholder engagement is going to go on, and not just with teachers, but also with other stakeholders that the museum has. So it is evident, that we do not know everything as curators or as museum specialists. So we'll need to integrate a diverse category and variety of partners in our processes, so that then we can make the museum a more engaging, and especially even for this younger demographic that we've been talking about, called the youth. So in conclusion, to me, an ideal museum of the future will be a space which fully and unequivocally captures the imagination of its audiences within the spaces that they interact with. The spaces will help raise questions, as they also act as a safe space for the audience to have the discourse. There will be spaces in which art will be given its rightful space and allowed to transform the communities and societies at large. Museums should then become living spaces, which is one of the ways to fully utilize the value of the objects therein. And by that I mean, of course, when these objects of curiosity were picked by, or were collected by these colonial administrators, they were taken off of the context from which they were, created or used. So when we take these objects back to the community then will be able to use them as they are. For example, maybe we have a leadership fly whisk, So in a showcase, it's just a very dormant whisk that has been pinned in there. But in the community, then it's something that is in the hand of a leader, and you can see the leader based on the regalia that the leader is having, and even the use of that fly whisk. So then in that sense, that becomes living, the object has been given life, as opposed to how it was in the showcase. So that is my submission of what I feel like and what I think that the museum of the future is going to be like. I thank you very much. Probably I give it back to you.
Thank you very much, Betty, for a wonderful insight that you provide regarding the topic. So if anyone has a question or want more clarifications, additions, welcome, Eda. Eda, please welcome.
Okay, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We thank you for your great communication. When you talk about communities museum, according to you, is it necessary to create museum in a community or to help communities to create their museums? I want to know this nuance. Thank you.
Okay, if I got your question, Jimmy, you're asking if it's necessary to have community museums. So I feel like, and especially in my country, that's actually is more of a truth than not, because then it's already entrenched in the our new dispensation of the Constitution. So museums are definitely going to go, to be devolved to the communities. And of course, then when these museums are devolved to the communities, the local government and then the National Museum, we have a mandate to assist those local communities to create good spaces, train them, have good culture, and also, I mean, as in when these objects go there, we'll, of course, in the end, provide the know-how, the manpower, to help them run those spaces until then they are able to stand on their feet. And also some of the museum staff are going to be devolved together with those museums. So then that means there's already a manpower that understands what needs to be done, or what can be done. So eventually, in the end, of course, government does have a space and a place in helping those communities set up their museums. And when those museums are set up, then also they become useful to those community members, because it becomes a source of income for them. If they are able to create performances, if they're able to bring in people to see their way of life, that becomes then an extra stream of income for that community. So it becomes really a win-win for everybody. We have people now able to visit those places, and you find that some of these places were, before that kind of devolution, places where not many people would go to. But now, because there's a resource there as a museum, then there's foot traffic going there. So in many ways, then it helps to open up those areas across the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Betty.
Thank
Alisa?
you.
Alisa, do
Yes,
you have a question?
No,
Okay, you're
no.
welcome.
She actually answered the question. Thank you.
Okay. Jerry, would you like to talk something?
All right. Thank you so much, Zura, Alisa, and also thank you to Betty. So just a contribution in terms of the last question, and then I'll speak on the addition I wanted in terms of the community. So I remember when we were growing up and we went to primary school, like in Kenya, we have 43 tribes. We used to have 42, now we have 43. We used to learn about these tribes, but that's all the information I have, which is many moons ago. But so what community museums have done also is just open up their spaces for us to be able to learn about that in a different light, because as we know, as time moves by, we also forget. We are not able to remember. But for example, in addition to the ones that Betty gave, we also like have the Akamba Cultural Museum. So those are places that we are able to attend and to learn about their culture. And so looking at it as a future of African museums, where if, say, the 42 communities in the different places have museums that people can visit, then they can learn about each other's cultures and being able to understand where people are coming from, and just learning. As we said, it's a place to, it's moving from being a place of musing, but it's a good place to learn. So just talking about, we talked about financial, where we were saying that, you know, most, at least museums in Africa, do charge people to come in. And so one of the things maybe that I wanted to ask Betty, or just wanted to hear her views, and even our professor who spoke earlier, is the issue of memberships, because we know that we are trying to come up with a solution to the non-attendance of museum, especially with young people in Africa. But say we have a Pan-African membership, either through the African Union, where if I'm in Benin, I can come with a pass, a membership pass, where I can go visit the museum there. If I'm in Senegal, or if I'm in East Africa, you know, if we have a united pass that allows us, because then you're able to want to visit more museums, maybe a discounted rate, where if you have that pass, then I know that I can visit the museum in Benin for half the price. So I think it's something that maybe you can mention, because you were talking about the long queues, and even just with the long queues, I think it goes hand in hand with technology, where we have people booking their visits before they already go there. So we don't have a long wait of people. We already know our capacity is maybe 200 people for tomorrow. So we already have people going online to book. But we also know that in Africa, we are having issues with internet. We are having issues with technology. So how do we get people who are not technologically savvy to be able to access these museums? So that's it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you so much, Njeri. Betty, would you like to add something?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Njeri, for that. No, in terms of memberships, I know if you're a member of ICOM, which then represents all, or yeah, actually it's the mother body of all museums. So once you become a member of the ICOM, and you have your ICOM card, when you go across the museums, even in Kenya, then you're able to go in for free. So that is one of the memberships then that we would advise most people to. And the ICOM in Kenya is really a strong body. It's a strong movement. And a lot of people have been encouraged and are actually joining in. So that is one way, you know, to then have a free pass to most museums. And I know a lot of people, when they know that they have to travel, is one of the things that they do is to get, you know, the ICOM membership. That allows you, that is the one way of allowing you to go into most museums. In Kenya, at least in my museum, there are two other bodies that you can be Kenya. And then we also have the Kenya Museum Society. So if you're a member of either of those two bodies, then you're also able to access the museums across the country. We are yet to get to a space where, other than the ICOM card, that you can have, you know, just Pan-African access to any other museum, not unless then you're going there for a workshop or any other thing that you've been invited to go there for. But just as a visitor coming from one African country to the other, we are yet to get to that level. But of course, I mean, that will be a good place to find ourselves one day. And I hope, you know, being the people here and the people in this space, then we will be able to raise these issues and eventually get there. Actually, we've just started the regional alliance, African Regional Alliance of ICOM. We didn't have one. So, you know, in ICOM, there are a lot of international, you know, committees, and then the regional alliances, but there was no regional alliance for Africa. So I'm happy to say here that we have just actually set the African Regional Alliance for ICOM. Then probably that's the body where we'll use to see if we can get access to our museums across Africa. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Betty. I also have a question here. You speak about the issues of stakeholder engagement and my question will be based on a community engagement. Maybe can you tell us at what level community should be engaged to make sure that we build the new African museum we want?
Thank you, Zuhura, for that. That's a very good question. When we talk about stakeholder engagement, you see, we are coming from a place where, if you remember in my presentation, I said we had collections and they were very static and they were just what they were. You could only go into a museum and see what was there and go home. But now we are getting to a place where we are bringing the community to the museum spaces. We are showing them what we have, or we go collect from them what they have, and then we engage them and ask them to, demonstrate, show us, what then those objects are, what they could be used for, and even to an extent where then we bring those communities to the museum spaces and have them demonstrate even to the public what the uses of the specific objects that we are talking about. But also in the sense that we, again, are not the know-it-alls. We do not know everything, I probably do not even, I'm Kikuyu myself, and probably do not know half of what, the Kikuyu objects in my museum would mean. So we have then that opportunity to go back to the community and bring them into these spaces and, engage with them to give more information, to even, teach our young ones, the younger generation, just so then that engagement is continuous. It's not a one, you start and then it ends. So it's a continuous engagement. And also when we are thinking, so through the processes of museums and museology, the processes of right from the beginning, when we are starting to conceptualize, for example, an exhibition. So, we always assume that we know, this showcase should stay here and this is the object that should go in there. But if we involve the community, if we involve our stakeholders, then they're able to, bring a different approach. So they're coming from the point of view where they are the consumers of this exhibition. They are the consumers of the information that we are going to put in these spaces. So then they have, a new approach into how, the exhibitions or the outlook of the exhibitions should look like. So then that makes it more enriching, and it means that then we are speaking to what the community wants. So then there's more buy-in from our locals, from our stakeholders, and from, our patrons. So of community engagement then for us, or going into the future, is a space where we involve them right from the word get-go. When we start thinking through our processes, they are there with us. When we are implementing, they are there with us. Yeah.
Wow, thank you so much. We also have a question here in the chat from Raphael. He asked that how to improve people's interest toward the museum. Can you respond to that?
Oh, wow, okay. Now, that's a very interesting question as well. How to improve interest? Some of these things are really very innate. It comes first from the individual themselves. How inclined are they to come to our spaces? But so then the challenge to us is, what can we do to, to pull them closer? So then it speaks to knowing our audiences, knowing the different categories of people who would come to our museums, and then creating events, programs, exhibitions that would speak to those people. So say we are talking about the youth, how have we in our spaces created exhibitions that would make them come and enjoy being in those spaces, So those are the questions that we need to ask ourselves when we are thinking about attracting people into our spaces. Just knowing who our audiences are and knowing how, what would attract them to these spaces. And especially like now, there's this whole culture of going to the mall, where you see these young people going to the malls and taking photographs. Can we have then Instagrammable spaces within our museums, so then these young people can come into these spaces, find their Instagrammable spaces, and while they're taking their photos, they're learning about Mekatilili Wamenza, or the first president of the republic, or whatever else it is that we are trying to also let them learn while they're in that space. So it's just to have a very good mix of that, just knowing who our audiences are and knowing how or what would interest them. For the older generation, I would probably think they would be looking for a more contemplative, more quiet space. So are we able to do that? Have we done that? There's a certain age group there probably who would be going out for dates, and can they come to the museum for a date? Is there a restaurant nearby whereby after they've gone into the gallery, they're able to go into that space and have their tete-a-tete as they eat and as they contemplate from what they've just seen in the museum? So it's just trying to bring ourselves in this space where we are very keen on who our audiences are and attuned to their needs, so that then we are able to provide for those, and in that way then we are able to attract the different people into these spaces.
Wow, thank you so much, Betty. Since we are approaching to the end of our discussion, if anyone has a questions, maybe need some clarifications, additions, you are welcome. And if not, I would like to
Zuhura,
say yes.
Can we kindly have Professor react to Betty's presentation, just to tell us, his thoughts on it? Yes.
Okay, Professor. Professor Rubio, are you in?
Yes, I am.
You are welcome to respond to Betty's presentation.
Merci beaucoup pour la parole. Je suis heureux que nos présentations soient complémentaires. Au fait, bien que Betty ait insisté sur d'autres points, mais elle est revenue sur l'aspect architectural. Donc, les musées du futur en Afrique doivent avoir aussi une architecture différente, ce qui est important. Par exemple, quand on voit l'architecture du musée de la civilisation noire au Sénégal, c'est inspiré du Great Zimbabwe. Donc, il faudrait déjà que le contenant lui-même fasse référence au patrimoine avant de voir les objets qui sont exposés à l'intérieur du musée. Et de mon point de vue, j'ai essayé d'exploiter davantage pas les aspects architecturaux, mais beaucoup plus le contenu, les modes opératoires qui étaient pour moi capital, dans la mesure où les bâtiments, on peut ne pas avoir pour le moment, en certains pays, les moyens de pouvoir bâtir, de pouvoir construire des infrastructures, mais au moins avec les bâtiments qui sont là, si on change déjà la façon de faire, le nouveau mode opératoire de promotion, de valorisation, de conservation du patrimoine, on peut déjà faire un pas avant que les bâtiments ne suivent. Et aussi sur le point concernant les publics, je suis d'accord, on devra vraiment trouver d'autres activités qui puissent faire du musée un lieu de vie, un lieu de communauté, un lieu de partage avec plusieurs activités. J'en ai parlé aussi, divertissement, mais tout cela en ramenant toujours au patrimoine. Donc, s'il y a un restaurant dans un musée, quelle sera la musique qui sera jouée? On peut dire que la playlist ne sera constituée que, par exemple, des chansons de telle communauté, de telle période qui nous renvoient à notre patrimoine. Et les vers, les sous-plats qu'on aura, est-ce que les dessins, ça sera des dessins des Kuba, des dessins des Wé, des dessins des Soussous, ainsi de suite. Donc, tout ramène au patrimoine. Sinon, le danger serait que ça sera un second mall rien que de divertissement, mais sans que cela ramène vraiment au patrimoine. Donc, on pourrait utiliser ça comme une voie détournée, mais pour toujours ramener au patrimoine. Donc, en définitive, les présentations étaient complémentaires et j'en suis fort heureux. That's all.
Well, thank you very much, Professor, for your good insight regarding the topic. So we're approaching to an end of the discussions, and it was very, very powerful discussions. Thank you so much for both panelists and members of floor who are attending this meeting. And regarding to Betty's presentation, I'm impressed about the issues of museum structures, the traditional structure of the museums. It is very, very beautiful. And when we started earlier, I talk about when someone talk about the African Museum, what comes to our mind? Which image comes to our mind? And what Betty present here is that it's the really, really, really image that I have myself in my head regarding the future of the museum. But again, I think museums should give their audience purpose. They should give them purpose in a way that they should be involved. They should be part and parcel of building this African museum we want. And I'm impressed about the technique which you use in Kenya to attract community, especially youth, to visit the museums. Like you say that even there are some people going to the museum for date, which it's something something very, very, very strange. Something very strange, but it's really, really powerful. It's really powerful. I'm impressed about that. So thank you very much. May I welcome Alisa, if you have something to add to conclude.
Thank you very much, Zuhura, for your excellent moderation. Thank you as well to our panelists. Sorry for the great presentations, for sharing their views on the new African Museum. I also think it was very interesting to hear both of you, to have your view, and yes, both of you shared very interesting insights on what the new African Museum is looking like and what we also wish for it to look like in the future. So thank you very much again for all this. I think it's a great way to also summarize all the discussions that have been undergoing on the forum since the beginning of the project in October, because we have basically been discussing all this since the beginning. So thank you once again, and see you for our next topic next month. I will let Jerry conclude maybe, and see you soon. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Alisa. And I'm sorry I joined in late. I had another commitment, but I'm so glad that I caught most of the conclusions from Professor and just to listen to Betty. And I think as we conclude, I think there's a lot that needs to be done, but mostly I feel like as Africans, it needs to start with our minds. Once we change how we view our perspective, once we change, we will start seeing it from an inside view. So thank you so much, as Alisa already said, for joining us. And we are looking forward to having you join us for the next month's topic, and even just joining us on the online platform as we continue these discussions on how we envision the new African Museum. So again, thank you, Zuhura, for a wonderful moderation. Thank you so much to our two guests, Professor Rubio and Betty. We are very grateful to have you here sharing your insights and your knowledge and experience with us. And I think we can have a group photo and then we can all say goodbye.